Hello and welcome back to another Outside Views video. Today we are diving into a crucial aspect of European Union law, the supremacy of EU law over national laws. This principle is fundamental to the EU's legal system and has significant implications for how laws are made and enforced across member states. So let's break it down. To start, let's define what we mean by supremacy of EU law. This principle means that when there's a conflict between EU law and national law, EU law takes precedence. In other words, member states must ensure that their national laws comply with EU legislation. But why is this principle so important? Well, it ensures uniformity and coherence within the EU legal system. The idea is that EU law should be applied consistently across all member states, creating a level playing field and maintaining the integrity of the single market. The principle of supremacy is not explicitly stated in the EU treaties, but it has been established through case law by the Court of Justice of the European Union, or ECJ or CJEU. But let's look at how this principle developed. In 1964, the CJEU made a landmark ruling in the case of Costa versus Enel. In this case, an Italian citizen, Costa, challenged a national law that was in conflict with EU law, arguing that EU law should take precedence. The court ruled in favor of Costa, stating that EU law cannot be overridden by national laws. This case established the foundation for the supremacy of EU law. The Costa versus Enel ruling made it clear that EU law is supreme in cases of conflict with national law. The court reasoned that because member states have voluntarily agreed to limit their sovereign powers by joining the EU, they must comply with EU legislation. Another significant case was Simmental II in 1978. Here, the CJEU clarified that national courts must set aside conflicting national laws, even if they are not directly challenged in court. This means that when a national law conflicts with EU law, judges in member states are obliged to apply EU law and disregard the conflicting national law. But how does this work in practice? Let's say an EU regulation requires member states to implement certain standards. If a member state has national legislation that conflicts with these standards, the national legislation must be set aside or amended to comply with EU law. However, there are limits to the principle of supremacy. For instance, national constitutional norms cannot be overridden by EU law. This principle was highlighted in the Solange cases in Germany, where the German Constitutional Court initially asserted that it would review EU law against national constitutional principles. Although the court has since accepted the supremacy of EU law, it emphasized the need for fundamental rights protections. Another important aspect to consider is the role of national courts. They are crucial in ensuring the application of EU law. National judges must interpret and apply national laws in a way that is consistent with EU law. If there's uncertainty about the interpretation of EU law, national courts can refer questions to the CJEU for clarification. The interplay between EU law and national law can sometimes lead to tensions, of course. For instance, if a member state fails to comply with EU law, the European Commission can initiate infringement proceedings against that country. And this process can ultimately lead to the CJEU imposing penalties if the member state does not remedy the situation. Despite these mechanisms, the supremacy of EU law is a cornerstone of the EU's legal order. It ensures that EU laws are uniformly applied across all member states, thereby supporting the objectives of the Union and maintaining legal certainty for businesses and citizens alike. In summary, the supremacy of EU law means that EU regulations and directives take precedence over conflicting national laws. And this principles, established by key rulings from the CJEU, is essential for ensuring that EU law is applied consistently across the member states. And while there are some limits and mechanisms for resolving conflicts, the principle remains a fundamental part of the EU's legal framework. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of the supremacy of EU law. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content on European affairs. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, leave a comment below. And until then, stay informed and see you soon. The next video is right here in the end screen.